Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Locke, welcoming you to this month's episode of Citizens Bulletin with our host, Ashley Klingensmith, who's the Pennsylvania State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Each month, Ashley brings timely reports about the work and efforts being done by AFP, which is one of the largest grassroots organizations in Pennsylvania and the United States. Welcome, Ashley.
Susan, happy December, and it's hard to believe this is the last episode of 2020, but I'll tell you, probably a lot of listeners out there, they're not necessarily sad to put this year behind them. So
exactly.
It's so good to talk with you.
It's wonderful to talk with you too, and we always look forward to these reports, and there's never been a more important time for the citizens of Pennsylvania to be informed. So please take it away and let us know what you have to share with us today.
Wonderful. Well, I have a guest with me today, our Deputy State Director, Grant Gulabon, who is just a fount of wisdom and knowledge when it comes to kind of the budget process in Harrisburg. And so, Grant, I just want you to introduce yourself to listeners. I know you've joined once this year, but just want you to introduce yourself, say a little bit about your background, and then I want to read a bit about the budget a couple of years ago and a letter that we sent to the legislature in June of 2018. And then I'm going to let you take it away. But yeah, share a little bit about your background.
Well, sure. Thanks, Ashley. Well, first of all, knowledge I can provide. I'm not guaranteeing wisdom, but knowledge I definitely can provide here. But I have been with AFP since June. So we're coming up on almost 6 months here, which is kind of hard to believe. But been with AFP since June. And my previous background, over the past 25 years, I've spent about half of that working with the Allegheny Institute in Pittsburgh and the Commonwealth Foundation in Harrisburg, which are two of the premier conservative, libertarian, free market think tanks in the state, working on a variety of state and local public policy issues. And, of course, budget issues are one of the most prominent that come up every year. And then for the past 13 and a half years or so before I joined AFP, I was in regulatory policy with the Pennsylvania Builders Association and the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. So working to reduce and roll back the spread of regulation that ends up being such a burden for Pennsylvania's job creators and for citizens that are trying to start and keep businesses growing here in the Commonwealth, among the many obstacles that we face. And so I'm very, very happy to have been with AFP for this time. I think we've made some good progress to start here. And, again, just looking forward to sharing what I can here about where we stand now that the 2020-2021 budget is finally complete.
Amazing. No, so appreciate that. And you are the guy for the job to tackle so many of the pressing issues that are going to face the legislature once again as they reconvene for the next legislative session. But we'll talk about, the stopgap budget that was passed in May, and then the latest 6-month budget that was just passed a couple of weeks ago. But I felt like it was appropriate to start this conversation by reading a bit from a letter that we sent the legislature, the General Assembly. It went to all members of the State House and State Senate in the middle of June of 2018. And it said it was all about the budget, and it said the legislature should accomplish the following during budget negotiations: pass regulatory reform. So the package of regulatory reform bills, including the REINS Act, making its way through the legislature, would eliminate or ease excessive regulations that hinder our economy from unleashing its potential. Second, we said that it should reduce spending. So during budget negotiations, lawmakers should stop spending money that we don't have on programs that we don't need, particularly on corporate welfare programs that benefit well-connected few at the expense of hardworking Pennsylvanians. Third, we should increase budget process transparency. So lawmakers should stop negotiating budgets behind closed doors, even out of sight from their own members of the appropriations committees. The opaque budget process lacks transparency and accountabilities. Taxpayers deserve more say and insight into how their money is being spent. And the fourth thing we said in this letter back in 2018, when it came to budget negotiations, was that the legislature should reject new taxes. We said lawmakers should not impose any new tax, such as the severance tax. And so, Grant, back in May of this year, we sent the appropriations chairman and the Democratic chairman, so the majority and minority chairman of both the House and the Senate appropriations committees, a letter. And we told them in that letter all of the different spending that we accounted for in our budget that amounted to just corporate welfare. And so can you talk a little bit about that letter and just what we kind of asked and what we asked for them to be conscientious of, and then talk a little bit about what happened in May?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, whenever you get back to the 2018 letter, the only thing that the legislature and the governor actually followed there was not raising taxes, which is a good thing in as much as itself, but all those other things, the lack of transparency in the process, negotiating behind closed doors, all of this, the secretive nature of the way that budgets have traditionally gotten done in Pennsylvania, and this happens under both parties, regardless of who controls the legislature or who the governor happens to be. This is something that is a long-standing problem and something that, again, we're going to keep hammering away at. But getting back to the May letter, I mean, first of all, as a number of our listeners probably know, the General Assembly passed, as you said, the temporary budget that took us through November. They passed us at the end of May, kind of a stopgap budget because of the uncertainty due to the state's response to the COVID pandemic. And in that, we urged them to take a very serious look at trying to reverse a number of the decisions that have been made in the past. I mean, there were calls for federal bailout to the states, but again, it was state lawmakers, governors of the state, that made the decisions that got us into the position where we are now. At the time, we had been expecting maybe about a $4 billion deficit in the current year, and so we laid out a number of steps, reforms, spending cuts, different ways of doing business that we could do in order to make sure that we get on a responsible path, use the opportunity to finally end this cycle of overspending and overtaxing that we've been doing, and doing things like privatizing the state's liquor stores, which would yield an estimated $1 billion a year in additional revenue, reforming our state's prevailing wage laws, and then reducing discretionary spending to the levels seen just a couple of years ago. But where we really wanted to see them target was the state's corporate welfare programs. Pennsylvania has been, for at least the last 3 to 4 decades, one of, if not the largest, dispenser of special favors to businesses in the form of grants, loans, all kinds of tax incentives designed to lure businesses from other states and also to keep businesses here, rather than doing the hard work of improving the regulatory climate through legislation such as what you talked about earlier with the REINS Act and the Fighting Chance Act, and also by reforming our state's tax code to make it more conducive to business investment. But we identified over $728 million in just corporate welfare programs alone. These are expenditures and provisions that benefit one Pennsylvania taxpayer at the expense of others. Favored businesses and industries get these. Everybody else pays for them. That's a matter of fundamental fairness, first of all. But second of all, it just doesn't work. because we've seen Pennsylvania's economic performance in terms of job growth and personal income and gross state product lag the nation for decades. And it's time to change this if we're going to have any hope of making this a place where people really want to stay, invest, and grow businesses.
Absolutely. So when it came to the May 6-month budget, I mean, Grant, there wasn't much, if you just tried to research it via Google, you just didn't find much. And the only time you were really able to get information about that budget was after it was passed. Right. Can you just talk about how that process worked, how it materialized and was signed within a matter of just, it seemed, hours?
Well, it was, again, I think the decision was made by legislative leadership. Again, most of the decisions in this process are made by leadership. It's not a matter of the leadership going to caucus and trying to get the will of their members before they make decisions. It usually goes the other way around. It's a very top-down process where the leadership negotiates with the governor's office. They come back with a product, and then they say, okay, this is what the deal is, and this is what you're going to need to vote for. But I think what they decided here was because of the uncertainty around the state's revenue situation due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the governor's very conscious decision to shut down a great deal of the state's economy, which, again, was not the only thing that he could have done, and certainly could have taken less drastic actions that would have had less of an effect on not only the state's business community, but the resulting generation of tax revenues. But they decided to fully fund certain parts of the budget for the year, education in particular, to fully fund those, and then to come back at the very end of session. They made a conscious decision to fund state government from July 1st until November 30th. And they picked November 30th because that's the end of the 2-year legislative session. So they set themselves up with a deadline that they had to meet, or the state would go into, quote unquote, fiscal crisis. And so, set themselves up then for a negotiation that took place mostly after the November elections, and what's called the sine die session, or the part of the session that takes place, again, after the elections are over, and during which legislators who were either defeated for re-election or just decided not to run for re-election still were able to vote on the budget. So they pushed that into that final 3 weeks of the legislative session, hoping to try to force a deal and to really come up with a situation where they'd have a better look at the revenue situation, but also to really present the members with a deadline that said, okay, this is what we negotiated, take it or leave it.
Wow. Okay, wow. And I encourage listeners to like us on Facebook. You can search for us by searching the page at PAAFP. And on November 17th, we posted a video of Grant interviewing a freshman member. His name is Representative Mike Jones. He was actually in our freshman class of endorsements that we've ever done here in our state chapter's decade-long history now. This is the first time we engaged in state legislative races. We endorsed 12 members, 2 senators, 10 members of the state house. Mike Jones was in that inaugural class of endorsements. But Grant did a great interview with him, and we published it, like I said, on November 17th. So if you just search through our Facebook history, you can watch that. And I think he had some really interesting and keen observations as a freshman of the process, of the budget process. So that's very, I would just encourage folks to look at that, because I think it's quite enlightening. But, we published, of course, on our Action Center, which is americansforprosperity.ivolunteers.com. We posted a letter that if you signed it, it was sent to both your state house and state Senate member. And it said, tell lawmakers, join House members in supporting a no tax hike budget. And so this letter urged members to consider adopting the following principles in order to create a responsible budget. We said we wanted them to eliminate the favoritism in corporate welfare spending. We wanted them to oppose new or expanded taxes, and we wanted it to promote vital fiscal growth by safely reviving the economy. And so, Grant, were there any new or expanded taxes in the budget signed, I believe it was November 23rd or 24th by the governor?
There were not, and again, that's probably the best news out of what the General Assembly ultimately ended up negotiating with the governor is they didn't raise taxes, they didn't institute any new taxes. We were very concerned that they might go with a severance tax on natural gas. I mean, there's been talk about legalizing marijuana and taxing that, and also there are a multitude of other sort of little silent tax changes that they could have made. They didn't do any of that, but the bad news is that what they did do just sets us up in a couple of months to relive this debate all over again, because one of the Democrat senators in the debate over the final budget bill said that Pennsylvania shouldn't take any pride in MacGyvering a state budget. I think that's an insult to MacGyver. I mean, MacGyver at least would come up with solutions that worked and would actually get you out of trouble. This is more like one of the old Roadrunner cartoons where Wile E. Coyote would order something from Acme Products that was finally going to solve his problem with the Roadrunner, and then it would blow up in his face. And that's what we have here. We have a situation where the state is using, first of all, federal money from the Federal CARES Act, intended for coronavirus relief. They had about, I think, close to $3 billion in funding left that they had to use by the end of this year. So they used about half of that to patch a budget hole from the previous budget, and then the other half to fill in part of the gap here. And then they transferred over $500 million from various other special funds, including $100 million from the state's rainy day fund. And just in pointing out just a little bit about the rainy day fund, Pennsylvania's rainy day fund as of July 1st of this year ranked 47th among the 50 states in terms of what percentage of general fund spending it represented. Really, it is only about 1% of our total general fund spending. The median figure for the 50 states is about 8%. And Pennsylvania was at 1%, which shows you how poorly positioned we were for a crisis such as that precipitated by the response to COVID. But what they ended up doing also were, our friends at the Commonwealth Foundation noted that they, in order to make the spending figure for this year look smaller than it actually is, they transferred about $1 billion of payments into the prior fiscal year. So everyone's been running around saying, we cut spending by 2.2% this year. It's actually more like a 7.5% increase based on a proper accounting of when these expenditures take place. So in 2 months, the governor will be presenting the 21-22 budget. We got through this year's budget with a bunch of maneuvers that we're not going to be able to repeat. There's no guarantee whatsoever that any assistance will be forthcoming from the federal government, such as what was available due to the CARES Act. And we have the same problems that we had before. We're still going to have a multi-billion-dollar deficit, and the first response of a lot of folks in the General Assembly, and certainly likely of the governor, is going to be, we need to raise taxes. And while there's never a good time to raise taxes, there could not possibly be a worse time to consider that, given that our economy is still trying to recover from the pandemic, that we're still seeing businesses, being forced to operate at much less than their full capacity. We're losing small businesses on almost a daily basis. And if ever there were a time where we need fiscal policy that adheres to the principles that you talked about, the way we laid out, this is the time.
Absolutely. I hope listeners trust that we will remain ever vigilant over the process that will as Grant said, commence, the first month these guys are and gals are back in Harrisburg, which is just next month in January. And they'll begin to have budget hearings and look at some of the realities that they're going to have to face. And you can also trust that many of the same folks that lobbied Washington for a bailout throughout this year will be doing the same thing with a new landscape in Washington, D.C. They'll be doing the same thing next year. And it might be more palatable to, if there is a different composition to the U.S. Senate, which remains to be determined at this point in time. But certainly in the House, they've been quite open to another bailout. And so I think President-elect Biden might be as well. So we will remain vigilant on that front, and just know that, we are going to continue to oppose any kind of plan that adds a burden to Pennsylvanians at a time when they can least shoulder it. And it seems that of all of the entities, whether that be, businesses or just personal households, of all the entities across Pennsylvania, it seems that the one that was spared from making tough decisions was Harrisburg and our General Assembly and our chief executive here. And so I really hope and pray that next year we are able to make the case, and will continue to do so, that corporate welfare is something that, if there was ever a time should be addressed, it should be now. And so we'll keep you all updated on any kind of additional letters or actions that we have posted in our I Volunteer Action Center. But I really encourage folks to visit that. Like, even you could make it part of a Monday morning routine or a Friday afternoon routine, where you just visit americansforprosperity.ivolunteers.com, and all of the actions there are organized chronologically, so which are most relevant. But as we kick off a new legislative session, we'll have new bill numbers, and we'll be asking some of our champions to reintroduce pieces of legislation we deemed transformative over the past couple of years that we weren't able to get across the finish line. And so I just really encourage folks to visit that. It is an incredible resource. And always, follow us on Facebook at PAAFP. And you can find us on Twitter as well by searching at AFP Pennsylvania. And we also have a brand new Instagram channel. So if you are on Instagram, we are AFPPA. So I encourage you to follow us there as well. But Susan, the half hour always goes so quickly, but I hope this was informative, and that folks do take advantage of being effective grassroots lobbyists, because, like I always say, 7 of us working here full time in Pennsylvania is not enough to make the difference that we need to make. And we need everyone partnering and taking action when that's available. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, both you and Grant, for this very informative report. And we can hope and pray that in the bleak midwinter, we will have light shining on these issues, thanks to the work that you all are doing there at AFP. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. And everyone, have an amazing holiday season and new year. And look, I think we can only go up from 2020. So 2021 promises to be better. And so I know a lot of people are looking forward to it. So just have a safe and healthy holiday season.
Same to you, Ashley. We wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. You too, Grant. Thank you both so much for being with us. And listeners, thank you. You've been listening to Citizens Bulletin, knowing your role as an informed Pennsylvania citizen. Please join us again next year. Thank you.